What's up, Econ students? Mr. Clifford here, coming at you with another ACDC economics lesson. Um, I know I'm on my selfie cam today, a little different, but we're going to be doing a lesson about comparative and absolute advantage with outputs. My friend Paxton will be giving you an example, and Evan will be explaining the problem to you. Um, so let's get rocking.
Okay, so when talking about comparative versus absolute advantage in output, the comparative advantage is when the country that is producing the good has a lower opportunity cost to produce the good than another country, whereas the absolute advantage is when a country can clearly produce more goods than another country. Absolute advantage is using all resources given efficiently when it comes to output, whereas comparative advantage is just using the opportunity cost efficiently. Because of this, comparative advantage is always mutually beneficial to both parties and it allows for growth, whereas absolute does not. It only allows for growth in the party with a greater output.
Okay, guys, let's start our problem. So our two entities are Mr. Clifford and Mrs. Clifford. And our two objects are steaks and sandwiches. So Mr. Clifford can produce 1,200 steaks, while Miss Clifford can only produce 600 steaks. But where Mr. Clifford lacks is in sandwiches. But Mrs. Clifford can produce a whopping 400 sandwiches. So let's get started. So, for Mr. Clifford on steaks, one steak equals about 1/6 sandwiches. And one sandwich equals about 6 steaks. Now for Miss Clifford, one steak equals about 2/3 sandwiches, and one sandwich equals about 1.5 steaks. Now we're going to get into absolute advantage and comparative advantage. Okay, guys, the next part's really easy. So, the absolute advantage is simply whichever one can produce more. So, the absolute advantage for steaks is MRC, Mr. Clifford. Alright? Then we have the absolute advantage of sandwiches, which would obviously be Miss Clifford. Now, the steak for comparative advantage is a little bit tricky. So, what you do is if it says comparative advantage steak, you look at one steak on each. And whichever one is lower on sandwiches is the one you choose. So since the sandwiches is 1/6 and this sandwiches is 2/3, we go with Mr. Clifford because it's less. The comparative advantage for sandwiches, you look at that. Mrs. Clifford has this one because it's less. 1.5 is less than 6. So Mrs. So the trade can occur. Now you just simply choose a number between 1.5 and 6. So we'll do 4 steaks for 1 sandwich. Now we're going to move on to the graph. Okay, guys. So here's the graph that's going to go with this chart. All right. So as you can see, Mr. Clifford is very good at making steaks, but he's really bad at making sandwiches. And Mrs. Clifford is really good at making sandwiches, but not so good at making steaks. And that's your graph. Alright guys, good luck on your test.
Thank you for watching ACDC Economics. Feel free to subscribe to the channel or comment suggestions for any other econ work. And see you next time.